Hello, hope you're having a great day. Another version of Off the Cuff. I record this because we're now halfway through August. We're at a time when schools are starting up again. A lot of elementary and high schools across the nation are going to be starting up for the new school year. Colleges are going back. Some of the schools in the country have already started up. So I know there's some parents out there already wondering about test refusal, and some people are learning about Common Core and what's going on. And I know people are already mulling that over, so I thought this would be a good time to give a little bit of a historical perspective, some of which goes back to 1979, some of which goes back to the 1800s by the end. And then I'm going to pose a series of questions, because they're questions that I, as a taxpayer and a citizen and a parent, I would like answers to these questions, and I hope maybe you'll have some food for thought as well. I want to come out and say that I am against high-stakes testing, the testing that is currently, in my view, assaulting our children and our schools, our communities, and our educators, and mostly because there's a misuse and abuse of these tests. Are being used in a manner that they were never designed to be used for, which is against a main testing axiom. Tests should never be used for something they weren't intended. And I think anyone who's taken the time to research this will see that the way these tests are being used is really not above board. And some people think it's part of a much larger battle, as do I. When Common Core standards first were thrust upon the nation, they were said not to be curriculum. But anybody in education know that standards drive the curriculum. Because if you have a standard, you have to have a curriculum, a map, as it were, as to how to get to the standard. So if you just come out and say they're standards, but they're not curriculum, you can't really separate the two. They're inexorably linked together. So you can't really say one without the other, because they have to both be talked about at the same time. Then you had Secretary Duncan, who really pushed the envelope in pushing the Common Core and the race to the top money, and states signing on to it sight unseen. They didn't even know what they were signing on to. And this whole thing about the program being voluntary, but if you don't volunteer, you wouldn't get federal funding. And there was a lot of mystery and a lot of secrecy surrounding Common Core, where it came from and the forces behind it. As a matter of fact, now it's come to light that there was a Supreme Court decision, I think in 2013, I have another video on this, regarding the Affordable Care Act. And one of the Supreme Court decisions, and one of the pieces written in that, clearly shows that what federal education did to foist Common Core and race to the top upon our nation's children is a now clear violation of the law, according to a Supreme Court decision linked to the Affordable Care Act. And if a guy like me can find that, my first question is, how come no of these big groups, or these pro-education groups, or other groups have not taken the federal government to task on this through the court system? Much like the Letterman case in New York, where the teacher is fighting the way the formula is used to rank teachers. I don't know why someone is not pursuing the federal government, because what they did is in clear violation of a Supreme Court ruling. Now, all the while, Duncan from the government side is pushing and using his stick to beat states into submission. You have people like the Eli Broads of the world, and the Walton family, who own Walmart, and the Gates Foundation, just pouring money into the Common Core, and they're really out to essentially, they're the very destructive forces in public education. The Gates Foundation was pumping vast amounts of money into national groups. The National PTA took money from them, La Raza, the National Urban League. Even groups like the American Federation of Teachers, headed by Randy Weingarten, was taking Gates money right up until, I can prove, last year, and I believe there still might be some Gates money coming in to the AFT, which is wrong. Sorry. Now, to date, any major organization that I have found that has come out to publicly support Common Core has received substantial Gates money. And I would also recommend, don't take my word for it, there's a gal named Mercedes Schneider who does a blog, and if you Google a brief audit of Bill Gates' Common Core spending, you'll come across her blog. It's a six-part series. It's well written, well researched, well supported. She did a bang-up job on it. You read that, though, it's eye-opening and, in my opinion, frightening how much money and how many levels of the system that it's just invasive and pervasive in. It is quite frightening when you see what the money has bought. Another person is obviously education historian Diane Ravitch, who's recognized worldwide as one of the foremost experts on education and as a educational history. And she's come out against Common Core, and she's provided extremely well-researched, great rationale and facts to back up her lack of support for it. If you look at, there's an assistant professor of education administration at Seton Hall University named Dr. Christopher Tenkin. And he did a great 23-minute video presentation in West Harrison, New York in September of 2013 about Common Core. And he confirms what many have believed all along and more believe now because it's true. The Common Core itself lacks appropriate scientific evidence for its very existence. And you have superintendents like William Calla. You have Superintendent Joe Rella, who has videos out there and has gone and spoken about exposing the Common Core reform agenda. Because reform doesn't mean we're going to make it better. Reform just means we're going to change it. So one of the things I have to point out, in 1979, the Federal Department of Education was created by Jimmy Carter. And education was under another cabinet position. Carter gave it its own. And the 6 tenets that Carter came up with were fantastic. But they say the road to hell is paved with good intentions. So I'm going to go over the 6 tenets very carefully. And you think, are these things happening in education now? Number 1, it would bring education into the national spotlight. And the Federal Education Department was given the authority to just stir the discussion about education. Not make policy, but just stir the discussion. Number 2, it would make federal education programs more accountable. I don't see a lot of accountability at the federal level of our government, any agency, let alone Fed Ed. Number 3, the Federal Education Department would promote better service to local school systems. It was there to serve the local school systems. 4th, by creating an education department on its own and separating it from under the umbrella where it was, the reorganization was supposed to result in a substantial personnel reduction and streamlining of the bureaucracy. And that in turn would save money, which would go to the locals where it was needed. I don't think that's happening either. But the 2 biggies are number 5 and number 6. The 5th one said that the federal education programs would become more responsive and transparent. It would allow people to better decide what the government should and should not be doing in education. The people would decide what the government should and shouldn't do, not the government deciding what we should and shouldn't do in education. And then the 6th one, it would ensure the Federal Department of Education would ensure local communities retain control of their schools and their educational programs because they knew best. Further on, it went to say the Federal Department of Education would not permit the federal government to begin making decisions on education policy that were best made at the local level. This has been so twisted and distorted and perverted, I can't even tell you. Those 6 tenets were wonderful in 1979, and that's what we should be going by now, but we are not. You know, I have to say, the federal government's first Department of Education was created in 1867 under President Andrew Jackson. Almost immediately, there were critics of the new agency, and they voiced concern that local schools would be subjected to excessive control by the Department of Education. As a result of that, the following year, the Education Department was reduced to a minor office and buried in the Department of the Interior. It amazes me that 150 years ago, people knew the dangers of excessive local control of schools by the federal government. And now we're living it here. Anytime there's a major issue that arises in society, think about who's going to gain profit from it. And then, where's the problem coming from? Who's reacting to it? Why are they doing that and in what way? And then look for those that are offering up a solution. In this case, it's the reformers. So here are some questions. Why were there all the secrecy and half-truths that still are rampant in the government regarding Common Core? Why resort to bribery and coercion to force states to volunteer for Race to the Top and Common Core? Why were superintendents, board of eds, administrators, and even educators told to not say anything negative about Common Core, even if it were true? Why the misuse and abuse of testing, now purposely using flawed data to ultimately will make our children look bad and hurt our nation's teacher and educational system? If you wanted to destroy public education, what organized group would you take out first? And even now, why the continued threats to school districts to take over, either school district takeover or loss of funding, threats by federal government and state government about the refusal movement, threatening schools for decisions made by parents regarding their children, decisions that they had every right to make. So the government's been at this for a long time. America 2000 under Bush 1, became Goals 2000 under Clinton, morphed into NCLB under Bush 2. Now we have Race to the Top and we have Common Core. So who really has created this so-called problem in education? Well, the answer is pretty clear to me. And really, is there even a problem with public education? Lastly, why is the control of our nation's educational system, our nation's children, why is control of so many in the hands of so few, many who do not belong in education to begin with? Thanks for listening. Hope I've given you something to think about.